When I first moved to the Twin Cities, everything in my life went horribly wrong. My girlfriend wrecked my car, said girlfriend became an ex-girlfriend, and the house I was living in was condemned. I was working for minimum wage at a comic book store and barely going to college at night. It was not a high point in my life. The only thing that kept me going was the thought of spring break. Just 1 week back home with my family and friends and out of the frozen wasteland that is the Twin Cities. And I'd been saving. I'd been saving for 6 months. Because when you work at a minimum wage job, saving for anything takes a really, really long time. And so I finished my last final at school and headed back to my apartment and decided to celebrate my new bachelorhood by ordering a Domino's pizza, eating it right out of the box, and playing video games all night. A day later, I was packed and ready to go home. All I had to do was drop my last paycheck off at the bank. So I went and handed the check to the teller, got the receipt, flipped it over, and on the back, my account balance was negative $536. And I felt all the life just drain out of me because I just couldn't catch a break. So I asked to see my balance statement, and there they were. 2 $600 Western Union money transfers, a bunch of random delivery orders, and a $400 charge to a website called inmatecanteen.com. So I sat down with the banker and said, no, these charges are false, and she went about trying to reverse them. And I started to think about how unfair identity theft is. Because when somebody steals your identity, they only take the good parts. They don't take the rat trap apartment or the crappy job or the depression. They just took the one thing I'd been looking forward to for the past 6 months. So while I'm thinking about this, the banker comes back and she tells me the bank is going to give me all my money back, but it's going to take a week of processing. So I leave and go back to my apartment, but I can't stop thinking about it because I knew the bank wasn't going to do anything and the police weren't going to do anything, and these people that steal identities, they don't get caught. But this theft, this was different because this person had messed with the most dangerous type of human being, someone with limited options and a lot of free time. And so I started my own investigation. I started going through my bank records. I called Western Union, and they were no help. I went to inmatecanteen.com and called the support number, and it was disconnected. So all I had to go off of were these delivery charges, and I realized they were local. And the last charge that I made on my account was when I had ordered that Domino's pizza, and I realized that I'd read my credit card number over the phone, and the woman on the other end must have written it down and used it. The woman at Domino's robbed me. This was more upsetting, because this was someone who could live 6 blocks from me, who spoke to me on the phone and heard my voice. This was someone I trusted. I mean, I trusted Domino's. Of all the people or things in my life that I thought might betray me, Domino's was not on that list. And this was most upsetting because I spent years as a delivery driver, and this broke the code of ethics. This wasn't just a theft, it felt personal. And now I had a suspect. The next day, I marched into that Domino's and demanded to know who had been working the night my identity was stolen. The manager on duty passed me to his manager, who passed me to his manager, and they eventually told me to come back later. So I continued my investigation by going to a restaurant called the Green Mill, where some of the other delivery charges had taken place. The manager there was really helpful because the restaurant was totally empty. He gave me an entire week's worth of delivery tickets, and I started sorting through them looking for a match. And after about 30 minutes, the phone rang, and he picked it up and began taking an order. Then he picked up the piece of paper and started waving it frantically back and forth. Then I went over, and on the paper is a credit card number. And it's my credit card number. And on the other end of the phone is the person that stole my credit card. And the manager's looking at me like, well, what do we do now? And I look him square in the eyes and I say, give me a topper, a hat, and I will take that delivery. And he says, that will get me fired. And I say, okay, maybe not the best idea, but tell them your driver is sick and it's pickup only. So he hangs up the phone and says, they'll be here in 15 minutes. So I grab a newspaper and find a booth and prop it up and sit down for my very first stakeout. An agonizing 17 minutes later, a car pulls up, and a woman gets out and comes in to ask for her order. And I start writing down every detail: what she's wearing, what she looks like, the license plate number, the fact that it's a white lifted Chevy Tahoe. Meanwhile, the manager is telling her that her card was declined and that they need to run it again. She says she left it in the car, leaves, doesn't come back. Lastly, I asked the manager to do me one more favor. I asked him to star 69 the number she called from, and I add that to my growing list of evidence. A couple hours later, I receive a call from a man who introduces himself as the head of Domino's security. He was calling to apologize, thank me for my help in the investigation, and told me that once I'd filed a police report, Domino's had my back. He also pulled the hours I wanted and said they were waiting at the original location. So I went to go pick them up, and when I did, I started asking questions. Did anyone drive a white lifted Chevy Tahoe? One of the drivers said a girl who worked the night shift did. A girl who matched the description of the woman in the green mill, who was working the night my credit card was stolen. Lastly, I had the manager check the cell phone. It was hers. Then I asked for her application. These places always keep those things on file, and at first the manager was wary of the legalities in giving it to me, but once I assured him that it was for the police report, he relented. So once I was done copying down this information, I now had her first and last name, date of birth, social security number, cell phone number. I had her driver's license number. I knew her car, make, and model. I knew her license plate number. I knew where and when she works. I knew her previous job references and her email address. And so I go home and I'm in a frenzy, and I can't stop. So I Google her email address, and when you do that, you can find all of the accounts that you created with that address. So I find her eBay account, and her Flickr account, and her MySpace. And her MySpace was set to public, because why not? So I can see all of her pictures, and her comments, and her blog, and I realize that I am going crazy. But the thing about going crazy is you just don't stop. And so one of her blogs was called 50 Things About Me. And the first question was, what is my favorite food? And she wrote pizza. So by the time I'm at the end of this list, I know more about this woman than her coworkers and probably even most of her friends. And I realized that this is a real human being that I'd be putting in jail. But she broke the code. So I call the cops. And the next day they send out an officer to take my report. And the fraud report goes as you would expect. How much money was stolen? When was it stolen? Is the bank reimbursing you? And the last question, almost as an afterthought, is, do you have any additional information which might benefit the case? And I said, why, yes, I do. And the initial confusion on the officer's face turned to laughter when she heard the full story. And after I finished, she said, well, I guess you've done my job for me. And I agreed. Later that day, I got a call from the detective now working the case. He's cross-checked all of the info I gathered with DOT records and the criminal database, and everything checks out. He tells me there'll be a warrant out for her arrest this afternoon. I tell him she'd be going to work tomorrow at 5 at Domino's. And after a pause, he says he'll have a squad car waiting. Lastly, I asked the detective if I could be there. I mean, I'd done all the legwork on this case. And I wanted to see the look on her face. That same look of shock and horror that I felt when I flipped over my bank receipt and saw everything that I had saved was gone. But he said that wasn't possible. He did say that if I happened to be walking across the street from the Domino's tomorrow at 5, no one would be the wiser. So I got to go undercover one last time. And I found myself standing across the street from that Domino's. Squad car parked in back, 2 officers inside, and I watched that white Tahoe round the corner and park, her get out, see the officers and her back arch up because she realized she was caught. Then they handcuffed her, put her in the back of the squad car, and drove away. Case closed. A couple hours later, I received one of the most surreal phone calls I've gotten my entire life. The man who called introduced himself as the CEO of Domino's, and he was calling to personally apologize, thank me for my help with everything, and I assume avoid a giant lawsuit. He asked me how much money was stolen and told me Domino's would reimburse me for everything. I told him that the bank was already doing that and that it wasn't about the money. And so he asked me what I wanted. And up until this moment, I hadn't really thought about it. I mean, what do you ask for? Free pizza for life? A pizza named after me? No. I told him I didn't want this to happen to anyone else. I told him I wanted Domino's to pursue this to the furthest extent of the law, and for every new Domino's employee to hear this story. To know that if you steal customers' credit card information, that you will go to jail. And he said he could do that. Later, I received 2 letters in the mail. The first said the woman had pled guilty to all charges and would be receiving a short prison sentence. The second was a personal thank you letter from the CEO of Domino's, a check for the exact amount of money stolen, and 500 Domino's bucks. And I realized I did get everything back that was stolen. The money, yes, but for that week, I wasn't the depressed loser in a dead-end job. No, for that week, I was Tristan Jimerson, private eye. The gumshoe that knows that revenge, like delivery pizza, is a dish best served cold.
Tristan Jimerson, ladies and gentlemen. Tristan Jimerson, what a story. An amazing story.